everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to share some information. A little bit about SBM Management Services. We are a janitorial company. We started in 1982, and we incorporated zero waste right off the bat. We knew that there had to be better ways to do things. And as a janitorial company, we see a lot of the problems that exist from how we try and go to be zero waste or what's involved with it. As well as the trends are starting to change a lot with the waste haulers trying to not have bags. Now, to be fair, in an operation, whether that's a small office or a campus of facilities, the bags are going to be inside the building. There are contracts in place that say janitorial will do X, Y, and Z. The problem is, especially when you get small bags, desk trash can bags, of recycle. Inside of the larger bag, you now have bags inside of bags. And we're finding more and more of the material recovery facilities not being able to handle the bags. So now the waste haulers are coming back to all the facility managers and asking them to eliminate bags. Well, that's hard because the contract doesn't show us that we can clean things, right? That we're hired to clean things, but not necessarily a trash can or a recycle can. We put a liner in, we pull the liner out, it's clean. And so when you get outside to do the process, you then have to do something with the bag, whether you're pouring it over something and cutting it and then the bag goes into the landfill. Gosh, that's wasteful. That's almost the opposite of us trying to be zero waste. So what we're going to share with you today is multiple speakers, and we're going to do the bio right before each speaker and talk through the problem statements of most recycling programs are unable to efficiently separate bags from recyclables, whether that's in-house, at your facility, at your building, at your office, anything that generates these. And so we are giving you some ideas and solutions to what the problems are or who you can communicate to. We'd like it if you put questions in the chat so that we can address them as we go. But our next speaker, talking about the recycle process, not at your facility, but at a MRF, at a place that you take your recycling to, is Spence Davenport. Spence really focuses on startup sales, facilities construction and operation, MRFs, material recovery facilities. That's where our recycling normally goes, and it magically separates into the processes. It also looks at mixed waste, plastics. He looks at equipment research and development and funding, municipal recycling, and policy best practices and research, talent and investment network, and he is an advisor. His company is Digital Industries Company. I had the luck of meeting Spence at the Waste Expo because we had people talking about going bagless, but they didn't understand the concept of the facility. How do I go bagless at my office? And I brought that up to the group and they started scratching their heads, and at least we started the dialogue at a different level. So Spence, if you'll take over.
Wonderful. And so excited to be here. Sue, can you hear me? I'm gonna make sure I at least check that box. Well, I'm super honored to be here, and like with meeting Sue at a trade show, I think I brought up on a panel that I didn't believe a material recovery facility could really be qualified as a true materials recovery facility unless it had a bag breaker, which we're going to talk about today. And that's kind of a joke because there's so much investment and equipment and really fascinating processing that goes on at these facilities that are really kind of the backbone of our recycling infrastructure. But there's a lot of bagged material out in the world. One stat from the Recycling Partnership, which is where I used to work, and the Recycling Partnership, just as a quick note, is a nonprofit that provides grants and best practices for the residential portion of the recycling world, mostly in the US. And so we would be able to get behind the curtain of a lot of MRFs and a lot of curbside programs to really understand what was going on. But one of the stats that they've released in their State of Curbside report is that I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina. The state of North Carolina, there is only a 15% access rate for recycling in multifamily buildings, which is about the closest we can correlate to commercial office buildings because they're kind of treated by the same hauling companies and processes for collection. So basically, a resident can put this material in a bag and then put it down a chute, off it goes. Only 15% of those in North Carolina actually get their bags probably broken open and recycled. 37% on a national basis. So that's just an interesting stat to put in the back of your head of the potential here to improve. Now, this slide shows a map of all materials recovery facilities. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. These are called MRFs in the industry, in the waste industry. So if you see that, you can know that basically pulling in commingled recyclables and some source separated materials and putting them in through an in-feed of a system that has conveyor belts and magnets. Hopefully they have some screening processes to size, as well as some optical sorters and some other really cool technology that sorts. But what they're looking for at these facilities is to automate as much of the process as possible. So automation means let's design equipment and let's design processes and procedures so that we can basically capture about 85% of the material that comes into a system with no human involvement. So basically, your curbside collection vehicle will dump material onto a tipping floor. This loader will come and grab it, much like a bulldozer, an excavator will put it into the system. And then we're going to start sorting based on these bold items here. So you're going to look for size. Can we screen things that are bigger than 8 inches or smaller than 2 inches? Bigger than 8 inches might be cardboard or bags full of recyclables or trash, and 2 inches or less might be glass or dirt or little fines. And then anything in between is kind of like the core part of the recycling world. We're going to look at shape. So is something two-dimensional, three-dimensional? Density is something heavy or light. Usually heavier means it's kind of like something that we don't want because it might hurt the system. We're going to look at chemistry and image, and that's where an optical sorter and robotics can come and look at items, and magnetism. So is it ferrous? Is it non-ferrous? Is it an aluminum can? Is it something like steel where eddy current separator or a magnet can grab it? Now, the reason I go over that really quickly, and you can see an image of a MRF at the bottom right corner here, is because we're looking for automation. We're looking for scalability. We're looking for efficiency when we're at a MRF. And even if it's a cleanest recycling stream, it's going to have some dirty, nasty things in it. And a lot of times when we're talking about bagged recyclables, these companies don't want to risk putting their employees in danger, much like each one of you at your companies. Things like sharps or needles might be hidden inside of these bags. And so when a person has got this material coming over a conveyor belt and they want to grab that bag to maybe rip it open, you could expose yourself to something pretty hazardous. It doesn't happen too often, but it is something that we make sure we have best practices and work instructions in place for. But what if you had something automated that could do it for you? And we're going to talk about bag breakers as an item. Now, before we do that, there's a couple of special cases. So right here, I've got this stack of shredded paper, and I'm sure a lot of your businesses have those sitting in your copier room. This is high quality paper. We want to recycle this as much as possible. And when you're at a MRF, you kind of keep your eyeballs open for it if you see this coming along on a conveyor belt. You want to grab it and put it in with your mixed paper so it can be shipped off to a paper mill. But oftentimes they get broken open and then you've got shredded paper everywhere. So there are some things that folks are looking for on a conveyor belt that they're saying, "Oh, I'm going to grab that. That's definitely a target I can get, and there's probably not a needle in there. I'm going to grab the shredded paper." But oftentimes when we start to stuff bags of this inside of another bag and it becomes obscured, that's when we're going to lose that valuable commodity. So that's one little oddity that's in the system. But where do bags fit? Really, right now, across the board, if we had to say it, a lot of them are getting disposed because the MRFs don't have the resources or the time or the equipment to really handle it. And I'd say there's probably about 15% of the MRFs in the US have that capability for bag breaker. So why don't we go to the next screen and talk about what this actually is. So bag breakers are, I would say, I would recommend if I was designing a MRF today as like a required item. And the reason why I would require this in a MRF design, if I was a service provider for a community or a major commercial customer, would be because exactly what we're about to learn about today. Folks are, you've got to carry your waste outside of your home or out, to your hallway, or if you've got a janitorial crew or a service provider, they've really got to use some kind of mechanism to get this material to their dumpster. It's kind of silly if you think about it that a waste management company or a MRF wouldn't be able to break these open. So this is an automated way to break these open safely. And so as we leave today, maybe you have this in the back of your mind when you are negotiating contracts or talking to your waste services providers to say, you know what, I've heard about bag breakers. Is that something you have at your facility? If not, can you check on that? And what would it take to get to that point? So the way these work is pretty simple. There's a conveyor belt that feeds bagged materials into a hopper. That hopper then releases this bagged material into this chamber. And this chamber has a rotating, more like a barrel or a drum. They've got teeth on it, on the barrel. And then the barrel moves material through until it hits a tooth where it starts to rip up and liberate the recyclables within. And then the recyclables just fall and drop into another conveyor belt. And that conveyor belt just sends it right back into the MRF's main feed stream. So it's almost like it was never bagged in the first place. A lot of that film can actually get caught on the teeth of this drum. And that's a good thing in a lot of cases because it prevents that film from being loose and then going into the MRF itself. And later, doing breaks or during shift changes, the maintenance team or the operators can come and basically unzip all of that film and remove it from that drum. And if it's clean, they could recycle it. A lot of times it's got other things kind of wrapped into it, but at least we've liberated all the contents inside and given them a chance to get captured. But yeah, I guess that would lead us to the next slide. Yeah, these are actual bag breakers at facilities. We've got yeah, there you go. The reasons why your local facility might not have a bag breaker. First off, you might not have a MRF nearby. So that's a question. You may have an aggregation site or a transfer station, or you maybe have like more of a source separated facility. So that's something to think about and learn about in your ecosystem in your local area. But they are expensive. And they can range anywhere from about $200,000 to $500,000 if you start to include things like other conveyor belts, platforms where you can access the drum itself to clean it off, and any auxiliary equipment or support. Those things always kind of start to add up and inflate the cost of an actual unit. But the actual units themselves are about $250,000. They don't require much space, about 10 by 10 or 20. And the only things that they do require space to be able to take material away after they liberate the recyclables. It does require some labor. So that is something additionally that folks might say, while the sorters don't have to grab these bags necessarily and rip them open anymore, you do have to have a maintenance tech. It doesn't have to be dedicated fully to this bag breaker by any means, but it is another item that maintenance team has to focus on as they are ensuring that the conveyors are running, that the in-feed's running, that the optical sorters are working and up to snuff. But a lot of times this can, they've got to rip these film pieces off of that drum. Maybe some film has then gotten loose and gone into the conveyor system themselves. And that film can actually wrap around the screening mechanisms at MRFs and cause some downtime issues or cause a loss in efficiency. So I don't have a picture, and I should have included a picture here, and I'm sorry, but a lot of the sizing that is done at MRFs, so they're looking to separate out a 2-inch minus, so anything smaller than 2 inches or anything larger than 8 or 9 inches. They use disc screens that spin around really rapidly. And what these disc screens do is they allow two-dimensional objects to go up the screen because they can kind of grab them and move paper and little smaller pieces of cardboard up the screen, while three-dimensional objects and cans can drop down. And as this is spinning, if a piece of film from a bag that's been broken open wraps around it, it'll quickly start to, as you can imagine, just kind of bundle around that spinning shaft and start to plug the holes that would normally have screened out the 2-inch minus and things like that. So more contamination starts to get in the system, more potential for downtime or faults on the motors and things like that. So when you start to talk to your waste management service provider, that'll be something that they bring up, which is it's a very real problem, is downtime of film. But if you have a bag breaker, a lot of that can be captured within the bag breaker, and then your system's kind of set up to then pull that material off either through a hood system that sucks up any loose film and you can actually bail that and send it to market, or at least the sorters have a fighting chance to look for it and grab that loose film, knowing that there's no needle or puncture item or anything sharp within it. So it really does kind of set the stage for different processes in the MRF to successfully get film out of the system. And that's something that a lot of people don't know, and nor would you ever know because you don't go to MRFs every day like I do. And it's something that you can ask and maybe hold your MRF provider accountable on. And they might have a really good response, and it's okay, but it's just something to have in your mind about what happens to film in the system and how you could how it could be recovered. So I think we'll go to the next slide with this. Yeah, so I think this is my last slide, and we can kind of double click into this for 2 minutes, but you can see that in that last slide how a bag would fall into this chamber and that drum would kind of grab it and rip bags open. There might not be a 10 by 10 or a 10 by 20 platform available near the MRF itself, near the equipment. So there's other ways to do this. There's things like this, this center image here, the stability, what we call in design. And you could have a bag breaker on the tipping floor itself that has a conveyor that just feeds into the infeed of the MRF. That way, when a loader operator sees a bunch of bags getting dumped out of the back of a truck, it can just grab those items and put them in the infeed of the bag breaker itself, and voila, you've got broken open bags. How easy is that? It does require some square footage on the tip floor that a MRF manager may not want to give up, but it's worth the consideration, and it might be a cheaper install. Another thing in the top right corner, which is a little difficult to see, is robotic arms, which are happening more and more frequently within MRFs today because we want to reduce the labor costs and we want to reduce the risk exposure to laborers. We want to use robots that can safely grab items and also scan and use artificial intelligence to understand a material composition of materials while it's grabbing something. Maybe it's grabbing bags and it's safely grabbing bags and then depositing them into a bag breaker or something like that. That way there's zero risk to any human, which is a really smart design application that's just starting to take hold nowadays. And then there's this last item, which is similar to a bag breaker, but it's an oversized film separator. And these are less common in the US, more common in Europe, and where it's loose bags have already been broken open. They come up from this right side up that conveyor belt, and they get blown on by that yellow blower that you can see in that diagram. And the film goes up The heavy stuff that's not film drops down, and this rotating drum has these fingers that just grab that film and they carry it off to a different conveyor belt so we don't have to worry about it anymore. And that way we can focus on all the things that fell down. And it really sequesters the film, which everybody's kind of concerned about from an operational perspective. So, in summary, a lot of MRFs do not have bag breakers. I wish they did. There are different ways to break bags open. It doesn't have to be a 250 to 500,000 piece of equipment. There's other things that we kind of looked at. But it's worth asking as you're discussing strategies for zero waste or new contracts with your haulers. Where does your material go? What MRF? And then secondly, can we talk to that MRF? Can we visit that MRF? Let's see what equipment is in there and learn about a bag breaker and see what's going on. And I think it could create some interesting conversations for you and maybe some new pathways to get your material recovered. So that's it for me. I think I'm at my 15 minutes. I am going to sign off, but I'm going to pass it on to Cindy. Cindy.
Yeah, thank you, Spence. That was really insightful. That was great. Next slide, please. So now I'll be discussing Bagless recycle implementation through the perspective of the custodial team and the operational challenges in collection and disposal that would need to be addressed in order for this transition to work effectively. So 3 of the main challenges of transitioning to a bagless recycle program, again, from that custodial perspective, are going to be labor intensity, safety risks, and additional time required during collection and handling. Then later on, we'll also look at these challenges and how they can be mitigated through planning, standard procedures, and education. So first challenge is labor intensity. While we want to support the transition to bagless system, we do need to recognize that the kind of operational toll it can take. So labor intensity, because this means that custodial staff will be spending more time per container since they're pouring and dumping materials rather than quickly replacing a liner like they would be in a traditional system. There's also an increase in handling effort since these recyclables are now loose, which makes containers heavier and sometimes messier to manage. And finally, this can have a ripple effect because of scheduling and staffing. If one person's route is now taking longer due to this, pouring system rather than just grabbing a quick bag, it might affect now other services in a given shift, and it can really start to add up. Next slide, please. So the second challenge is safety risks. Without liners, custodial teams now handle the bottom of containers or the bag as they pour it into a container, which increases their chance of contact with unseen or sharp objects like glass shards or metal fragments and things like that. There's also, as I mentioned, risk during the lifting and pouring. Now that they are not just lifting and swinging a bag over, now that they might need to lift heavier containers, maybe putting them in an awkward stance, and this might cause strains or injuries if the right ergonomics and tools aren't in place to prevent this. If containers are too tall or far off from the platform, then again, reaching into the bins or that kind of equipment might pose a hazard of now like slipping, falling, or other injuries due to the awkward placement of containers. So in total, addressing safety is essential to ensuring the system is sustainably in place for the team that is physically doing the work and ensuring the overall success of the program. Next slide, please. The third main challenge then is time. As SBM's time studies have shown that bagless collection adds 1 to 2 minutes per container on average. And this might not sound like much at one bin, but then across a full shift in hundreds of bins in a day, it adds up pretty quickly and can, actually cause some accumulated delays that affect completion of other tasks, restroom cleaning or restocking an item and things like that. So while it's a small change per container, it has a large cumulative impact on overall efficiency. So that's why we'll also address that in the solutions later on. Next slide. So these are the 4 solutions that can help address and overcome the challenges. So first is developing standardized procedures, coordinating resources, planning ahead, and implementing strong education and training programs. Next. So first of all, we recommend developing standardized procedures that create consistency and reduce risk for staff in the best way that it can. Include addressing container design, as I mentioned, for example, ensuring that bins are the right height and accessible for safe handling for the staff. This would include defining safe methods for navigating ramps, stairs, ladders, and things that might be added to address awkward container placement. Since also a lot of custodial routes have elevation changes that might have stairs and things like that. So if they're pulling, a double brute system instead of carrying bags up the stairs, that's definitely going to impact the program. And finally, procedures that include using bag breakers or funnels and how to handle loose materials safely without excessive bending or lifting for that employee. When these standards are clearly defined and trained across all the staff, then the process is smoother, safer, and more predictable, so we can avoid any safety hazards. Next slide. So coordinating resources with the client, the facility management, other vendors, this ensures that the workload aligns with the available staff and tools, and then potentially, addressing if additional labor is needed. So this would start with assessing labor requirements, understanding how much extra time is needed per shift for this new process. So I mentioned a time study earlier. You might want to look at a specific time study for that site that this will be implemented at, if that's necessary, if you don't already have that estimation. Then you can adjust staffing plans accordingly, whether that means reassigning routes or adding part-time support during transition periods. It's also important to update vendor contracts to reflect the additional labor needed and cover any new costs, or even costs for new tools such as, lift assist or, ramps and things like that are going to be needed. You definitely want to look at that before the program starts and ensure that's covered. And then also with collection schedules, if that's going to be prolonged, looking at the costs in that as well. So this coordination just helps maintain the balance between sustainability goals, but also the operational feasibility, because the operational staff is going to be bearing the burden here. And then just ensuring the longevity and success of the program. Next slide. The third solution then is all about planning ahead, because as I've touched on, we can reduce that physical strain by incorporating tools and equipment that streamline the whole process. So tools needed will depend on the current infrastructure already at the site, but you might consider researching things like trolleys, lift assist devices, or funnels. PPE or personal protective equipment like gloves, safety glasses are super important and should be standard during the handling process to minimize that exposure to hazards. And then evaluating the container placement, again, as I mentioned, minimize that lifting, bending, keeping routes ergonomic. So in short, just proactive planning and looking at the process from all angles and ensuring everything is covered before you start. Next slide. And finally, last solution here, but education and training is definitely the foundation for long-term success. So training programs should emphasize how to minimize safety risks while still maintaining that operational efficiency, excuse me. They should also communicate the sustainability goals behind the program, because helping teams understand how their work contributes to waste reduction and in that environmental stewardship can also support their participation and willingness to help with the implementation of the Bagless program. So to do this, you might look at video training modules, quick accessible guides that they have on hand. Maybe it's printouts, or maybe they have, that constant access to an online module, and then refreshing the information, the process with quizzes and other ways, just to ensure comprehension and engagement of this new process. And as I mentioned, when staff understand the how and the why, then participation and performance improve dramatically. Next slide. So beyond the main challenges I touched on, there's a few other things to just keep in mind in this bagless recycle implementation. So the first would be container maintenance, as loose recyclables might cause more frequent liquid and food residue to build up in the container now that they're not contained in a bag. So it can be a little bit more messy. So you might look at more frequent cleaning and maintenance of that container to prevent pests and things like that from becoming an issue. Since you definitely want to keep the site clean at all times. Monitor servicing in the first few weeks of implementation, since now that loose recyclables are not being compressed and contained in the bags, it will fill up in fewer loads or disposals. So just keep a close eye on the overflow and servicing of the container in the first few weeks, and just note that you might need some adjustment there. And then lastly, as I touched on existing infrastructure, consider, the fact that having stairs or containers that are located off of platforms might make the site not an ideal candidate for the program, or at the very least, you would want to look at the solutions we discussed to mitigate that. But take a look at the existing infrastructure before you get going, for sure. Next slide. So with that, I'll hand it over to Katey Custer. She's our Regional Sustainability Manager for SBM, and supports clients nationwide in achieving the different sustainability goals, and she'll be taking us through next steps and key takeaways.
Thank you, Sydney, and thanks, Spence, for great description of a MRF. We learned a lot today. We learned that not all MRFs have a bag breaker. While they strive for automation based on size and shape, chemistry, image, as well as magnetism, that only about 15% of MRFs will actually have a bag breaker. And having bag recyclables in that case can be a safety risk for those MRF employees, which we definitely want to consider. But when it comes to the janitorial side of things and how we will actually take that and implement bagless recycling, we also know that removing bags creates operational challenges. We need to create new processes, standard operating procedures. Procedures must be in place, and they will take time to implement in coordination between those teams. We must consider safety. That goes along with, current infrastructure or, container types. Things like elevation of the bins may need to be considered. And Sydney talked through, several of those different types of lift assist or other types of equipment that we would like to have considered in those standard operating procedures. Our additional equipment may need to be modified. We need to have, different processes in place for that. Janitorial labor, will be adjusted from this process. We learned that it's going to take, more time. It's going to take more of our resources there. And those are things that are going to be considered, the labor intensity on those employees. Next slide, please. Thank you. So now, what if we do have a request from our hauler to get that bagless recycling process going? We need to first understand what those expectations are. So we need to align with our haulers. We need to align with our site staff and our janitorial team on what we need to do that clearly is lined out for us. That will tell us what kind of equipment is needed. Does our janitorial staff need to have different bag breakers or ramps outside the containers? We need to have those standard operating procedures in place, as well as those safety procedures. We need to do training for our janitorial staff, and we need to consider how they're going to safely deposit those materials into those outside containers. It is really wise to do a pilot in some areas so that we can understand what those challenges are ahead of time. We can work through some of those processes before we actually scale that up to the full site. And then we need to also follow that with communication, constant communication, educating our staff. That can be also with the employees themselves on site using our containers for the recycling, removing liquids from that so that it is not as much of a messy process. So definitely a lot of things to consider. But thank you again, Sydney and Spence, for all of that great information. And I'll hand it back over to Sue to Jill.
Thank you. Great presentation. We wanted to check in and see what kind of test or questions that we have. I'm going to stop sharing. What kind of questions and things we might have. So 4 people in the chat. Welcome. Are there any guidelines on how much expense is added and where cost savings may help offset increased expense? That's a good one. We're seeing anywhere, and it depends on distance. So one of the things that's very important is depending on where your trash is, whether that's a trash compact or a front end loader, open top box, and where is your recycling? So in some instances, they've got a great system and you got a wall and you got an opening, you open the door and you throw the bag in. Nice and simple. But the recycling is close the door, you go outside the building, around a ramp, back up, and now you've got a front end loader at an angle sitting on a ramp that you now have to get the lid open and then be able to put the bags in. So that could take maybe an extra minute. Then you're tearing the bags open and you're dumping the material and you're trying to just shake it all out because it's not, you don't want to spend a lot of time sort of plucking things out. So it depends on your safety knife and how you open that. Then you're going to have to stage those bags that are now leaking liquid somewhere, maybe back into the container, and you might open 10 or 12 of the bags. Recycling's done, you close the lid, then you go back inside for that next minute and open the lid to the trash compactor, and then you throw the bags back into that. So that could be anywhere from a minute to 30 minute and a half, 2 minutes on every bag. So the easiest way to figure this out, and if you have multiple buildings with multiple docks, that you're going to have to do time and motion studies on each of those. In addition, the other way to look at this is how many bags do you buy that are recycling bags? So that's easy if you're buying blue recyclable liners, okay? I ordered 10,000 of them. I go through 10,000 in a month. That could easily be 1 to 2 minutes per bag, per 10,000 bags. Now it's become huge, right? That's when, especially when you hear, and this is where Spence comes in with his knowledge and the knowledge of the engineers. We hear that they're getting ready to put a MRF in. As a facility manager, as a janitorial manager, if possible, they don't always listen to janitorial, to be fair. But as a facility manager, they might be going over and talking to whomever's making that MRF saying, whoa, I need you guys to put bag breakers on the front. Oh, we don't want to put that extra $200,000 to $500,000 on. That's an expense we didn't plan on. Well, gosh, as an owner of a business, a large business, I might be willing to pay an extra 25 cents a pound going into that MRF so that I don't have to use all that labor on my site. Does that make sense to everybody that's on? I mean, if you have questions from this, please feel free to jump in. But it really is important to know the process. The other thing that Sydney was talking about, we talk about safety a lot. Safety is very important because things can happen that you don't anticipate. Even one of the pictures that Sydney had has got a nice, beautiful, clean baby blue container, but it had a bubble on it where they can hook things on it. Well, if the employee catches that wrong, they could cut their arm. They could even break their arm for that matter. So there's so many things that we have to look at. Sydney also mentioned that we throw bags into spaces, throw bag into spaces that are easy to throw the bag. You don't have everything falling apart. But if I have 2 feet between me and where my dumpster is, I'm expected to lean over that and somehow get the lid open and then cut the bag, lean over, get it all out, and then pull the bag back. Unsafe. We're going to have to do something different, or we have to move it to a different building. So there's a lot of thought process behind this on how we handle things. So there is an expense on labor. There is also, actually, cost savings is probably nothing because you're not able to eliminate the bags that you would like to get rid of. Because you can eliminate the bags, and we actually did a time study on, let's not put a bag in that container, but we have to clean the container. Cleaning took longer than just putting a bag in and bag out. So that didn't save us any money. I wouldn't say there's any cost savings whatsoever to this process. Okay. Sydney, there's one for you. During the Q&A, can you expand on why bins need more frequent service without bags?
Yeah, so it's not definitive, but it is something to look at because if you see a picture of a container, like a front end loader container that has been it's overflowing or it has bags piling up, and the lid can kind of close over the bags. So those bags are keeping in a lot of material that if to pile up as high as it would in those bags. So the bags have this effect of being a little bit more compressing, holding it all in together, and therefore it's a little bit more forgiving for any instances of overflow. So if the disposal is already kind of pushing that container's service to the max, if you then switch to a bagless system, it's not gonna be as forgiving. So you might want to monitor that and see if you might need to up the service on that container then.
Do you have concerns with that method with liquids now are loose in a front end loader?
Yeah, absolutely. That's another thing to watch is now that liquids and food residue aren't going to be contained in those bags, not only with overflow, but then you might have liquids flowing out more frequently as well, which is why you definitely want to watch the container maintenance as well, as we mentioned, maybe more frequent cleanings and other things, maybe tarps to mitigate the liquid drainage from those containers.
Good point. Good point. I think the other problem with those is not all. You got to check your contract with your waste hauler. Some of them will change them out once a year. That way you get new signage. They're all nice and pretty. But if they don't, you're going to probably have to pay for a company to come out and clean those containers. Because somebody walking by the dock is going to smell them more regularly than even a compost front end loader. So it's just something to plan ahead for. Very good.
So I want to encourage, we're a smaller group, so feel free to turn your camera on or turn your audio on if you have questions or comments for the group here. Even if you may be embarrassed if your dog is snoring really loudly behind you, like mine is right now. But I did have a question also. I suspect I know the answer to this, but I'm curious if when people are placing items into unlined bins, is there any like increased desirable behavior of people dumping their liquids or cleaning their recyclables? Yeah, you're shaking your head. So no, like visually, this isn't really going into a trash bag, so I should be more
You just
conscientious
froze.
about my clean and
Yeah.
dry process.
Yeah, no, I don't. We've even seen businesses buy the ones that are the pretty sort of almost like a laundry basket with the leaves around them, and they're nice and pretty and they're metal. And then people go and pour them in without the liner, and you just watch the liquid just puddle. It puddles on the carpet. So I don't know if I'd say that it changes anyone's behavior. I wish we had more people that cared about what everybody does. Even if you have places, we have one place that we were trying to do some research on that actually does not use liners. They're using a metal container. It is sealed, but that means that if there is liquid in there, something's got to go inside the metal container to get the liquid out. You know, whether you're using a cleaning device on a pole, you know, a mop, right? Or something like that. But not having a liner in a container inside a building where you have hundreds of thousands of people does not work. So yeah, good question. Good question. Anybody? Okay. Well, you know, hopefully it's a valuable lesson to learn. It's got both the MRF from can't talk, municipalities, the cities that set up the programs that we, the businesses, and or even city employees have to deal with after that. And so it's how you think about things. Now, on the janitorial side, we're starting to have more discussions about how do we eliminate the small desk recycle bag that goes into the big bag. And we're doing a lot more work around that because unequivocally, even if you have a bag breaker, it's not going to like us opening up a bag, pops the bag, and 30 little bags come out. You know, it's almost like it's taking over the whole thing. So that's definitely something that has to be worked on with businesses to try and do better. Perfect.
Sue, I would jump in.
Sure.
Oh, I'm sorry, Jill. Sue, I thought you brought up a really great point. I just wanted to click into it just a little bit. When a region is thinking about building a new MRF or a new contract is coming out with hauling, you know, these are things that as facility managers, property managers, and the like, it's very strategic to have a good relationship with your public works team or your any kind of similar entity that is on the municipal or county side, even if you're on a newsletter or a distribution list, so you can keep your ear to the ground because you know they have a very busy agenda and schedule. But knowing that you are engaged and curious, it equips them with a little bit more leverage to start pushing their service providers to do more. And you can join in on that. So when we're giving an example of a bag breaker at a MRF, which, you know, you can get a bag breaker or not, but just to be a little bit more engaged in what the capabilities of your region are on the recycling infrastructure side, it can be really important. So I thought that was a really good point, Sue, and just wanted to illustrate it a bit.
Thanks, Spence.
I just had like a quick question. Is there any like effort to decrease the amount of waste stations? I know like I do outreach, so sometimes that's what I tell people is, you know, it'd be easier to deal with the three streams if there weren't so many stations. And I notice like a lot of like for instance our public works office here in town, like they every single desk has a teeny recycling, which just seems maybe unnecessary. And I don't know if there's like a lot if you deal with a lot of pushback with that, but it seems like maybe that would help address the extra time it takes to service a bagless container.
Interesting, Amanda. I think there's a couple things to be aware of. as a janitorial company or as the planner in the group decides how many cans should be set out, hopefully they're 3-stream, number one. Number two, on average, there's a capacity number that we use, which is 50. We need to have enough capacity, 50 cubic yards for 25 cubicles. That's a typical that when we plan on putting a set of bins out, if you don't have enough, they're overflowing, and then you've got a different problem. If there's too many, you're addressing them, you're pulling more liners, you're spending more labor. So it's a fine line on how you do that balance. That's a very good observation. Perfect. Someone else had their hand up.
My name is Catherine. I am interested in talking a little bit more about the small blue bin. So kind of like Amanda's question, but do you have any best practices around how to encourage folks to, get up and take their waste to those centralized bins? Right now, we're in a situation where every cubicle has a little blue bin, and that little blue bin hasn't been respected for recycling only. So, do you have any creative suggestions around eliminating that little blue bin, going only to centralized, and how do you get folks to do it right?
That's a great question. We call it centralized trash collection, CTC. And there's a few ways to do this. We've seen this over easily the last 20 years, that some businesses want to save money, right? And it's a sustainable direction by eliminating desk trash cans and or recycle containers. So they're trying to teach you to go get up when you go get your coffee or when you run to the bathroom to take your waste with you. There are businesses that 100% are behind this, and there are businesses that are sort of at that, I'd like us to do it, but I'm not sure if we should do it, so maybe we should or shouldn't do it. And so the key to that, in my mind, is a small group of volunteers, right? So that you get a small group or you've got an admin group and you talk to the group to say, what do you guys think about just removing these? And we have to have enough centralized trash containers throughout the building so I don't have to walk to Timbuktu, because I'm not going to do that. I'm busy. We all know we're busy. And I misspoke. It is 50 gallons, not 50 cubic yards per 25 cubicles. But you can start out, Catherine, and have volunteers that actually completely remove them. The best thing about going that route is eliminating all those terrible petroleum-based bags, because every bag is in, and worse, as a janitorial company, in our contract, it states that if there is a piece of gum or a small amount of moisture or a gum wrapper, we have to change out that liner. So, those that I don't use it often, we still have to change it, because otherwise we can get in trouble with the quality of our service. But the volunteering, I think, is a really great way to do it. I've seen entire facility groups and EHS groups run a process that they all completely take them out of the cubicle, give them back to the facilities team and say, either go do something with these or donate them to a local school, right? And then you start talking about it a little bit more. We definitely have trouble with administrators and, that your top level of executives that do not want to have anything to do with this, even though they want it done. So, it's talking to your management team and saying, God, we should be doing this. Why aren't we? I know of many other companies that are doing this. There's a very large financial institute that really is looking into this heavily right now, because in the past they were sort of worried about, what happens with the paper? Well, if you have confidential paper at your desk, it still needs to go into a confidential bin somewhere through the facility, right? The janitors, it's not their job to empty things or know what's financial concerns or has people's names on it and so on. So, it is, it could be a security item, up to you guys, but definitely I think that it's a great direction. It tends to save a little bit of dollars on the janitorial side as well. You know, realistically, if we clean out offices 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, those 3 days, the other 2 days, you're either compiling stuff or you're dumping it yourself. Then the main areas are dumped. They're looked at daily to determine if they need to be emptied. Usually compost will be emptied daily, sometimes landfill. Landfill doesn't have to be emptied daily if we actually put compost and food waste into the compost program. But then recycle could be even left a couple days a week so that you're not pulling things all the time. So that eliminates bags, right? That makes us a little bit more of a zero waste community, and we're trying to make a difference. Did that help?
I wish I knew the end results for the program. I just remember that a couple years ago, Stanford University was rolling out a CTC. Now I know the term, the centralized trash collection. And they, as part of their promotions, made it a health issue. That we need to be getting out and up from our seats and away from our screens more. So we're taking away your bins to get you up and moving more frequently during the day. I don't know if they stuck to that or what the response was from the campaign, but I thought it was an interesting approach.
That's a great one. You want me to reach out to Julie and find out?
Yeah, it'd be great to know.
I can tell you that most businesses that roll it out keep it, unless their employees are absolutely, it's bothering them and it's creating chaos as a job. We did a really interesting project once, and it was over Christmas. We had one client that we did notice ahead of time. We showed them what the new containers would look like, all kinds of things. And then the other one chose not to educate at all. They went home for the winter break. They came back and their desk trash cans were gone. Oh my God, what have you done? You know, and the ones that we educated, it worked fabulously. I mean, A++, it was fabulous. Rolled it out to all the rest of the customers. This one went backwards for about 4 weeks until everybody had a meeting. We had a giant powwow, talked through why it was being done because nobody communicated that. And it rolled out a second time better. And they usually keep them. So it's too expensive to go backwards, to be honest. And I've also seen people, I do know one other business that donated all of their desk trash cans and recycle. They're gone. And then a decision was made to bring them back, but they were already gone, so they had to buy new ones. So, great direction. Well, Jill, thank you for the opportunity to share all of this information and our knowledge and bring in experts like Spence and Katey and Sydney. And, you know, if you've got other topics, especially around janitorial, been around 32 years playing in the trash, but we'll help in any way that we can.
Great. Well, thank you. And thanks to your whole team for showing up. It's always fascinating to go through like the case study and really see what the sticky points are and how some of these changes that we want are not so easy and can be expensive, but also good to see Spence, like the new technologies that are being introduced that maybe help take some of this off of the education and outreach team and the facility to be able to use robotics and sorters and other methods to address increasing our recycling rates. So awesome. Excellent. Well, thank you. We are at the hour, so I'll release you all back to your other activities. And yes, again, we will have a recording available. We will have a slide deck available. So as you have colleagues that you want to share this information with, we'll have those tools available for those that couldn't attend today. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.